This is HOA craze. I watched the chain rattle, and she watched me panic. Karen shouted that the boot was a temporary compliance measure, and she loved temporary things. "You are making this easy for me," she said, jabbing her finger at the yellow clamp locked around my guest's front wheel. I stood in my driveway in Madison, Wisconsin, holding my phone at chest height, recording every word. The cottages at Willow Glen Homeowners Association had been escalating for weeks, but this was a new low. Karen White, HOA president, had called a tow operator to boot my friend's car while he was inside having coffee, and now she was acting like she had done me a favor. I work as a home warranty claims rep, which means I read fine print for a living. I knew Karen was skipping steps on purpose. The association rules required written notice before any towing action, and I had never received one. My friend had a guest pass displayed on his dashboard. The boot was illegal. Karen did not care. She tilted her head and smiled, clipboard in hand. Color-coded sticky notes fanned across the top sheet like little flags marking dates. "I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink," she said. That line hit me like a slap. She was threatening to bury me in paperwork, and she said it on camera. The tow operator stood by his truck, remote control in hand, watching the argument unfold. He looked uncomfortable. I kept recording. Karen pointed at the guest pass and said it was expired, which was a lie. The pass had no expiration date printed on it. She claimed the new rule required vehicle registration numbers to be submitted 48 hours in advance through the HOA portal. I had never heard that rule. She pulled a laminated sheet from her clipboard and waved it at me. "This is the updated policy," she said. "Effective immediately. No grace period." I asked when the board voted on it. She said the board did not need to vote on administrative clarifications. That was when I knew she was making it up as she went. I asked to see the meeting minutes. She laughed and said minutes were not public until after the quarterly review. I asked who approved the boot. She said she did, as president. I asked if she had followed the dispute resolution process outlined in the CC&Rs. She said I was wasting her time. The tow operator shifted his weight and glanced at his phone. A teen on a bike braked hard at the corner, 1 foot on the pavement, staring at us. Karen noticed and raised her voice. "I will make an example out of you so everyone learns," she said. That was her catchphrase, and she meant it. I let her talk, because every word was helping me. She did not know I had been collecting evidence for 2 weeks. My dashcam had already captured her giving tow instructions to this same operator 3 days ago, and she had denied on record that any such conversation happened. I had filed a records request with the management company, and they were scrambling to respond. Now she was on video threatening to bury me in notices and claiming she loved temporary compliance measures. I could feel the power shift, but I did not show it. I asked her calmly what the fee was to remove the boot. She said $250, payable immediately, plus a $50 daily storage fee if the vehicle was not moved within 24 hours. I pointed out that the car was not being stored. It was parked legally in my driveway, with a valid guest pass. She said driveways were not guest parking, only street spaces were. I pulled up the CC&Rs on my phone and scrolled to the guest parking section. It said guests could park in driveways or designated street spaces. She glanced at my screen and said the rule had been updated. I asked when. She said she would email me a copy. I asked why I had not received notice of the update. She said notices went out through the portal. I told her my portal uploads had been failing for a week, and every time I tried to submit a document, it timed out. She shrugged and said that was a me problem, not an HOA problem. The side complication was deliberate. I had proof my portal login worked fine until the day I disputed a bogus violation notice. After that, every upload failed. I tried different browsers, different devices, different file formats. Nothing worked. I emailed the management company, and they said they saw no issues on their end. Meanwhile, deadlines were passing. Karen was using the portal failures to claim I had missed compliance windows. She was building a paper trail that made me look unresponsive. It was classic selective enforcement, and it was working until I started keeping my own records. Karen tapped her clipboard and said the boot would stay until I paid the fee and submitted the required advance registration. I said I would file a dispute with the board. She laughed again and said the board hearing was scheduled for today at 4, and if I missed it, they planned to default vote against me. I looked at my watch. It was 1:15. The hearing was in less than 3 hours, and I had not received any notice. I asked where the hearing was. She said the clubhouse. I asked if I could bring witnesses. She said witnesses were not permitted unless they were residents with standing. I asked if I could bring documentation. She said I could bring whatever I wanted, but the board had already reviewed the file, and the outcome was pretty much decided. That was the threat. She was telling me the hearing was a formality, a rubber stamp on a foregone conclusion. I asked what the board planned to decide. She said a $500 fine for the expired guest pass, a lien filing fee of $200, and a suspension of my guest privileges for 6 months. I asked what expired guest pass she was talking about. She pointed at my friend's car and said that one. I said it was not expired. She said it did not have the new registration number. I said there was no new rule requiring registration numbers. She said there was, and if I had been paying attention to portal updates, I would know that. I asked for a copy of the new rule. She said it was in the updated handbook. I asked when the updated handbook was distributed. She said it was uploaded to the portal last month. I said I never saw it. She said that was because my portal access was restricted. I asked why it was restricted. She said it was restricted because I had failed to comply with document submission deadlines. I pointed out that I could not submit documents because the portal was broken. She said the portal was not broken. I was just using it wrong. I asked if she could show me how to use it correctly. She said she did not have time to provide tech support. The circular logic was maddening, and it was deliberate. She was creating a paper trail that justified every escalation. If I missed a deadline, it was my fault for not using the portal. If I used the portal and it failed, it was my fault for not submitting earlier. If I asked for help, I was being difficult. If I pushed back, I was being combative. Every step of the process was designed to make me look like the problem, and it was all going on the record, which meant it would follow me. I needed my record clean because of background checks at work. Any HOA lien or unresolved dispute could flag during a clearance review. Karen knew that. She had said as much in an email 2 weeks ago, right before the portal started failing. The escalation ladder was clear now. First, she had threatened to tow my car for a made-up expired guest pass. Now, she had actually booted my friend's car and was pushing me toward a hearing I could not win. Next step would be a frivolous small claims filing meant to force me into court and waste time. She had already hinted at it in an email, saying the HOA had legal options if I continued to be uncooperative. I knew she was building toward a lawsuit, not because she thought she would win, but because she wanted to drain my time and money. That was the HOA method here, changing the interpretation of a rule mid-argument and acting offended when challenged. I told Karen I would see her at the hearing. She smiled and said she looked forward to it. The tow operator cleared his throat and said he needed a signature to release the boot, assuming payment was made. I asked if he had a copy of the authorization. He glanced at Karen, then said the authorization was between him and the HOA. I said I wanted to see it anyway. He said he was not required to show it. I said I was not required to pay for an illegal boot. Karen cut in and said if I did not pay, the car would be towed to impound within 24 hours, and the impound fees would be my responsibility. I asked which impound lot. She said the one the HOA contracted with. I asked for the name. She said it was in the handbook. I turned to my friend, who had come outside and was standing on the porch. He looked furious. I told him not to worry, I would handle it. He said he could just pay the fee and leave. I said no, because paying would be admitting the boot was legitimate. He asked what we should do. I said we should let them tow it, document everything, and file a theft report with the police. Karen overheard and laughed. "You are making this easy for me," she said again. She loved saying that. Every time I pushed back, she acted like I was proving her point. The teen on the bike rolled closer, phone out, filming. Karen noticed and snapped at him to mind his business. He said it was a public street. She said he was loitering. He said he was watching. She said she would call the police. He said go ahead. That was the moment I realized Karen had lost control of the narrative. She was used to bullying people one-on-one, in private, where there were no witnesses and no recordings. Now she had an audience, and she was cracking. I asked her if she wanted to call the police. She said no, because the police would not do anything. I said the police would probably be interested in an illegal boot and a threat to tow a legally parked vehicle. She said the vehicle was not legally parked because the guest pass was invalid. I said the guest pass was valid, and the boot was not. She said the boot was authorized by the HOA, and therefore legal. I said the HOA did not have the authority to boot vehicles without following the proper dispute process. She said the process had been followed. I said show me the notice. She said the notice was on file. I said show me the file. She turned to the tow operator and told him to proceed with the tow. He hesitated and said he needed the vehicle owner's signature first. She said the vehicle owner forfeited signature rights by violating the parking policy. He said that was not how it worked. She said it was absolutely how it worked, and if he did not proceed she would find a different tow company. He said he was not going to tow a vehicle without proper authorization. She said the authorization was right there, pointing at her clipboard. He said he needed to see the title or registration. She said the HOA did not need title or registration to enforce parking rules. He said his insurance company disagreed. That exchange was gold. The tow operator was refusing to proceed without proper documentation, and Karen was threatening to fire him on the spot. I kept recording. She pulled out her phone and made a call. I heard her say she needed a different tow company, someone who understood HOA enforcement. The person on the other end must have said something that annoyed her, because she snapped that she was the president and she did not need to explain herself. She ended the call and turned back to me. "Fine," she said. "The boot stays until you pay." I said the boot was illegal. She said we would let the board decide. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, smash that like button and subscribe for more wild neighborhood stories. I spent the next 2 hours preparing for the hearing. I printed every email, every portal screenshot, every timestamp that showed the pattern. I had a copy of the enforcement policy showing Karen was skipping required steps on purpose. I had the dashcam video of her giving tow instructions and then denying it. I had the metadata from the portal showing my uploads failed only after I disputed the first violation. I had witness statements from 2 neighbors who had seen Karen selectively enforce rules based on personal grudges. And I had an ally, a board member named Ed, who was fed up with Karen's tactics and had started leaking internal emails to me. Ed had sent me a chain showing Karen coordinating with the tow company to target specific residents. The emails included phrases like "make an example" and "selective enforcement works if we are strategic." They showed Karen explicitly ignoring the dispute process and approving boots and tows without board votes. They showed her editing violation entries in the portal after residents disputed them. One email had a timestamp showing she changed my guest pass violation from compliant to non-compliant 3 days after I challenged it. That was the twist. The portal showed the violation entry was edited after I disputed it, and the timestamp exposed it. She had gone into the system and altered the record to justify the escalation. I printed the email chain and highlighted the timestamp. Then I called Ed. He answered on the first ring and asked if I was ready. I said I was. He said Karen had stacked the hearing with 2 board members who always voted with her, so I needed to flip one of them or force Karen to recuse herself. I asked how I could force a recusal. He said if I could prove personal bias or procedural misconduct, the management company would have to step in. I said I had both. He said good, because Karen was planning to push for a lien today, and once a lien was filed it would be on my credit report within days. I arrived at the clubhouse at 3:45. The hearing room was a small conference space with a folding table and 6 chairs. Karen sat at one end with 2 other board members, a man in his 60s and a woman in her 50s. Ed sat off to the side, observer rule, not voting. I took a seat across from Karen. She did not look up. The other 2 board members introduced themselves. The man was named Roger. The woman was Linda. Roger asked if I had brought documentation. I said I had. Linda asked if I understood the charges. I said I understood them, and I disputed them. Karen cleared her throat and started reading from a prepared statement. She said I had violated the guest parking policy by failing to register a guest vehicle in advance. She said I had failed to respond to written notice. She said I had refused to comply with enforcement measures. She said my behavior constituted a pattern of non-compliance and warranted escalated penalties. She recommended a $500 fine, a lien filing, and a 6-month suspension of guest privileges. She finished and looked at Roger and Linda. Roger nodded. Linda asked if I wanted to respond. I said I wanted to start with a question. I asked Karen when the board voted to change the guest parking policy. She said the policy had not changed, only the enforcement procedures. I asked when the board voted to change enforcement procedures. She said enforcement procedures were administrative and did not require a vote. I asked who decided that. She said the president has discretionary authority under the bylaws. I asked her to cite the bylaw. She opened her binder and flipped pages, color-coded sticky notes flying. She found the section and read it aloud. It said the president may implement administrative clarifications as needed to maintain community standards. I asked if changing a guest registration requirement from optional to mandatory was a clarification or a rule change. She said it was a clarification. I pulled out the original guest parking policy and handed copies to Roger and Linda. I pointed to the section that said guest passes were valid as long as they were displayed on the dashboard. I asked if adding a 48-hour advance registration requirement was consistent with that language. Roger frowned and said it seemed like a significant change. Linda agreed. Karen cut in and said the registration requirement was implied. I asked where. She said it was implied by the spirit of the rule. I asked if she had any written documentation showing the board approved the registration requirement. She said she did not need documentation because it was an administrative clarification. I let her finish and then I pulled out the email chain Ed had sent me. I handed copies to Roger, Linda, and Ed. Karen's face went pale. I said I had obtained internal correspondence showing Karen had coordinated with the tow company to selectively enforce parking rules without board approval. I pointed to the email where she wrote make an example, and selective enforcement works if we are strategic. I pointed to the timestamp showing she had edited my violation entry after I disputed it. I said the portal logs showed the entry was changed from compliant to non-compliant 3 days after I filed my dispute. I said that was not administrative clarification, that was fraud. Karen started to interrupt, but Roger held up his hand. He asked Karen if the email was authentic. She said it was taken out of context. He asked what the context was. She said she was trying to address a pattern of non-compliance across the community. He asked if she had altered portal records. She said she had corrected an error. He asked who authorized the correction. She said she did, as president. Linda asked if the board had been informed. Karen said the board did not need to be informed of clerical corrections. Ed spoke up from the side and said altering a violation entry after a dispute was not a clerical correction, it was tampering with evidence. That was the moment the room turned. Linda closed her folder and said she was not comfortable proceeding without a full review of the portal logs. Roger agreed. Karen said the hearing needed to conclude today because the tow fees were accruing. I said the tow was unauthorized and the fees were invalid. She said the boot was authorized by her as president. I said the president did not have unilateral authority to order boots without following the dispute process. I pulled out a copy of the enforcement policy and pointed to the section requiring written notice and a 10-day response window before any towing action. I said I never received written notice. She said notice was sent through the portal. I said my portal access had been restricted. She said it was restricted because I failed to comply. I said I failed to comply because the portal was rigged to block my uploads. Linda asked if there was evidence of the portal issue. I pulled out the portal activity log I had requested from the management company. It showed my login attempts, upload failures, and error codes. It also showed that my account permissions had been downgraded the same day I disputed the first violation. I asked who had the authority to change account permissions. Ed said only the property manager or the board president. I asked Karen if she had changed my permissions. She said she did not recall. Roger said that was not an acceptable answer. Linda said the hearing needed to be postponed pending a full audit. Karen stood up and said the board could not postpone enforcement actions without violating fiduciary duty. Roger said fiduciary duty did not override due process. Karen said due process had been provided. I said due process required notice, an opportunity to respond, and an impartial hearing. I said Karen had skipped notice, blocked my ability to respond by breaking the portal, and stacked the hearing with board members who always voted with her. I said that was not due process, that was a kangaroo court. Karen said I was out of line. I said I had evidence proving every allegation. She said the evidence was obtained improperly. I asked what was improper about a records request. She said Ed had no authority to share internal emails. Ed said he had every authority to share emails that showed misconduct. Roger cut in and said the board needed to take a recess. Linda agreed. Karen said there was no time for a recess because the deadline was today. Roger asked what deadline. Karen said the lien had to be filed today, or the HOA would lose standing. I asked why the HOA would lose standing. She said it was a legal requirement. I asked her to cite the statute. She said she did not have it memorized. That was when I knew she was bluffing. There was no deadline. She was trying to force a vote before anyone could review the evidence. I pulled out my trump card. I had been holding it back, waiting for the right moment. I said I had a copy of the enforcement policy showing Karen was skipping required steps on purpose. I said the policy required a warning letter, a 10-day response window, a hearing, and a board vote before any lien could be filed. I said Karen had skipped the warning letter, blocked the response window, and was trying to ram through a vote without proper review. I said the policy was dated and signed by the previous board president, and it was still in effect because no subsequent board had voted to change it. Karen tried to grab the document. I pulled it back and handed copies to Roger and Linda. She said the policy was outdated. I said it was the current policy until the board voted to replace it. Roger read the highlighted section and said it was clear. Linda said the HOA had not followed the policy. Karen said the policy was a guideline, not a requirement. Ed said the bylaws defined enforcement policies as binding, unless superseded by a board vote. Karen said the bylaws were subject to interpretation. Roger said that was not how bylaws worked. Linda asked if anyone had seconded Karen's motion to impose a fine and file a lien. No one spoke. She said without a second the motion failed. Karen said she did not need a second, because enforcement actions were administrative. Roger said enforcement actions that included fines and liens required a board vote, period. Karen said the hearing was a formality. Linda said the hearing was the process, and the process had not been followed. Karen raised her voice and said if the board refused to enforce the rules, the community would descend into chaos. Roger said the community would be fine. Linda said the board needed to focus on consistent, transparent enforcement, not targeting individual residents. Karen said I was not being targeted, I was being held accountable. I said being held accountable required following the rules, and Karen had broken every rule in the book. I pulled out the dashcam video on my phone and played it. The video showed Karen standing beside a tow truck, pointing at my car, and telling the driver to boot it the next time he saw a guest vehicle. The driver asked if there was a violation notice on file. Karen said she would handle the paperwork later. The room went silent. Karen said the video was edited. I said the metadata was intact, and I would be happy to provide the raw file. Roger said he had seen enough. Linda said the board needed to vote to rescind the fine and void the boot. Karen said the board could not void the boot because the tow company had already been paid. I said I had not paid anything. She said the HOA had paid the tow company to secure the vehicle. I asked who authorized the payment. She said she did. Roger asked if the board had approved the payment. Karen said it was an emergency expenditure. Linda said there was no emergency. Ed leaned forward and said the management company had received multiple complaints about Karen's enforcement tactics, and several residents were organizing a petition. He said the petition had enough signatures to force a recall vote at the next election. Karen said the petition was invalid. Ed said the property manager had already confirmed it met the signature threshold. Karen said the property manager had no authority to confirm petitions. Ed said the bylaws gave the property manager exactly that authority. Roger said the board needed to vote on a motion to freeze all enforcement actions pending a full policy rewrite. Linda seconded. Karen said the motion was out of order. Roger said it was absolutely in order. He called for a vote. He voted yes. Linda voted yes. The other board member, who had been silent the entire time, voted yes. Karen voted no. The motion passed 3-1. Roger said all pending fines, liens, and towing actions were voided effective immediately. Linda said the HOA would refund any fees paid to the tow company. Karen said the board did not have authority to void contracts. Roger said the board had full authority over HOA expenditures. Karen stood and said she was filing a complaint with the property manager. Roger said she was free to do that. Linda said the property manager would probably be filing a complaint about her. Ed said the management company was already reviewing the emails and portal logs. Karen grabbed her binder and walked out. The room stayed silent for a moment, then Roger looked at me and said he was sorry. He said the board had relied on Karen to handle enforcement, and they had not been paying close enough attention. I said I appreciated the apology, but the damage was done. I said my record was clean now, but Karen had put me through weeks of stress and cost me time I could not get back. Linda said the board would be scheduling a special meeting to review all enforcement actions from the past 6 months. She said if any other residents had been targeted, they would have a chance to dispute. Roger said the board would also be reviewing Karen's authority and considering whether she should remain as president. I said I would be attending that meeting. Ed said he would be bringing the petition signatures. I left the clubhouse and walked back to my house. The boot was still on my friend's car. I called the tow company and explained what had happened. The dispatcher said they would send someone to remove it within the hour. I asked if there would be a fee. She said no. The HOA had already authorized the removal. I asked if the driver would be the same guy from earlier. She said probably. I said good, because I wanted to thank him for refusing to tow without proper authorization. She laughed and said he had called in earlier to complain about a difficult client. She said the company was reviewing whether to continue the HOA contract. The tow operator showed up 40 minutes later. He looked relieved when he saw me. He said he was sorry about the mess. I said it was not his fault. He said he had been doing tow work for 15 years, and he had never seen an HOA president as aggressive as Karen. He unlocked the boot and loaded it onto his truck. My friend came outside and shook his hand. The operator said the company was probably going to drop the HOA contract after this. He said Karen had been calling every day with new demands, and half of them violated city ordinances. He said his boss was tired of the liability. I asked if he would be willing to provide a statement for the record. He said absolutely. I gave him my email, and he said he would send over copies of the authorization requests Karen had made. He said some of them were wild, including one where she asked him to tow a car that was parked legally on a public street just because the owner had challenged her at a board meeting. He said he refused that one too. I thanked him and he drove off. 2 weeks later, the board held the special meeting. Karen showed up with an attorney. The attorney tried to argue that the emails Ed had shared were privileged. The property manager shot that down immediately and said internal board communications were subject to records requests under state law. The attorney tried to argue that the portal edits were legitimate corrections. Linda pulled up the audit log and showed that Karen had altered 6 different violation entries over a 3-month period, all after residents had disputed them. The attorney went quiet. Roger moved to remove Karen as president. Linda seconded. The vote was 4-1, with Karen voting against her own removal. The board appointed Linda as interim president. Karen said she would challenge the vote. The attorney advised her not to. She ignored him and filed a complaint with the state HOA ombudsman. The ombudsman reviewed the case and sided with the board. Karen was formally removed from the board entirely at the next general election. The petition Ed had organized brought out enough voters to flip 2 additional seats, and the new board voted to terminate the contract with the predatory tow company and rewrite the enforcement policy from scratch. The final twist came a month after that. A neighbor filed a formal complaint with the city zoning board, alleging that Karen had been operating an unlicensed property management side business out of her home and using her HOA position to funnel clients. The city investigated and found evidence that Karen had been charging residents for expedited permit approvals and priority violation reviews. She was fined and barred from serving on any HOA board in the county. The story made the local news. The reporter called me for a comment. I declined, but I did send her a copy of the dashcam video. It aired that night. At the end of it all, I got a formal apology from the board and a refund check for the time I had spent dealing with the boot and the hearing. The check was for $300, which covered maybe a tenth of the actual cost and stress and lost time, but it was something. The HOA also voted to freeze all enforcement actions pending a full policy rewrite, which meant no one else would get targeted the way I had. Karen was forced to retract her claim in writing, and the board published the retraction in the monthly newsletter. The funniest moment came during the final board meeting, when someone played a recording of Karen threatening to bury residents in notices, and the entire room heard her repeat the threat multiple times. That became the line everyone remembered. People started joking that Karen loved temporary things, like her time as president. I still live in the cottages at Willow Glen. The new board is not perfect, but they follow the rules and they listen when residents raise concerns. The neighborhood feels different now. People are not afraid to push back when something does not make sense. The fire lane enforcement is consistent and reasonable. The guest parking rules are clear and fair. The portal actually works. I kept my job and my records stayed clean. My friend still parks in my driveway when he visits, and no one bothers him. Karen moved out 6 months later. No one knows where she went. Some people say she joined a different HOA in another town. I hope they have better bylaws. I will share another story next time.